The mountains stood like sharpened blades at the far edge of the horizon, their flanks washed in late summer light. The air was thin and brittle, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and dust, the sort of air that stripped words bare and left silence to do most of the speaking. I remember her then, small against the sweep of the land, walking toward my cabin with a broom clutched tight in her hands as if it were both shield and offering. Her steps faltered at the threshold, but her eyes held on, steady with desperation. "I ain't good," she whispered, her voice catching like dry reeds in the wind. "But let me stay and work." Her name was Ayoka, 25, though her face carried the quiet shadows of someone who had walked further years than that. The town had spoken of her before I ever saw her. They said she had been cast out by her kin, shame attached to her like a burr that would not release. When she arrived at the edge of my clearing, I saw not shame but the exhaustion of someone who had run too long with no place to rest. I was Silas Boone, a man with calloused hands and a silence I wore the way others wore their hats. 35 years on this earth, and I had learned to trust only what the land could give: sun, soil, sweat, and little else. A woman standing at my door meant trouble, and trouble was something I had spent most of my life avoiding. Yet the way she held herself, shoulders bent, eyes dark with humiliation, struck something inside me I had no name for. I did not speak right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, heavy between us. The cabin, the fields, the thin wind, all of it seemed to listen. Finally, I nodded once, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. Still, I kept my words sealed. She settled outside the cabin that night, no complaint on her lips, no questions. By morning, she was sweeping. The broom rasped against the hard-packed dirt, drawing quiet circles in the dust. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if each stroke were a small prayer for belonging. The women who passed on the trail to town muttered sharp words beneath their breath. "Poor fool," one said. "Does she think she can sweep away what she's done?" Another spat in the dust near her feet. Ayoka did not answer. She only swept, her head bowed but her spine unbending. Children trailed behind, hurling stones that thudded harmlessly against the ground near her. Still she worked, her silence more defiant than any outcry. And I, from the porch, felt the weight of their cruelty press into me. I had known rejection in other forms, and it was not easy to watch someone else endure it. That evening, as the sky deepened into violet bruises, I set a tin cup of coffee by her side. No words, just steam rising in the cooling air. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it, but her eyes met mine with a glimmer I could not decipher. Gratitude, maybe, or the faintest spark of trust. I retreated to the porch again, listening as she sipped. Silence stretched out once more, but it no longer felt like distance. It felt like the slow stitching of a thread between us, fragile and unseen, yet undeniably present. Each day after, she found new tasks. She mended the tear in my shirt without asking. I left a pair of worn boots near her mat, and by morning, they were polished with care. Neither of us spoke of these gestures, but each one lived in the air between us like a secret flame. The town continued to sneer, their whispers riding the wind, circling us like vultures. But Ayoka kept sweeping, her broom widening the circles, her body claiming more of the earth around the cabin. I found myself watching her more closely, her patience, her quiet resilience, and it unsettled me more than I cared to admit. The days slipped into one another, the cabin no longer quite so hollow. Still, I knew the land had its own harsh rules, and nothing that fragile could endure without cost. Yet when I looked at her in the fading light, sweeping as though she were drawing a boundary only she could see, I wondered if perhaps she was already laying claim to something neither of us yet dared to name. And in that wondering, I realized the story was only beginning. The days wore on, and with them the slow stitching of routine. Ayoka's presence was no longer a shadow outside the cabin, it was woven into the rhythm of the place. She planted clay pots with herbs along the porch, their green shoots bright against the pale dust. At night, as I mended tools by the fire, she would hum songs from a world I could only imagine. Soft, steady melodies that curled through the room like smoke. I listened without speaking, but the sound lodged itself in me, loosening walls I had built long ago. Still, the world beyond the cabin did not forget. Whispers in town grew sharper with each week she stayed. Men in the saloon spat her name like it was bitter in their mouths. Women shook their heads, warning their daughters not to stray near that cabin where shame lives. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a judgment meant to crush. Yet every morning she rose with a broom in hand, sweeping the yard until the ground itself seemed to shine, as though her insistence could carve out a space untouched by their scorn. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the horizon, a group of ranch hands rode by. Their laughter was jagged, the kind that carries knives hidden inside. "Work won't wash you clean," one of them jeered. Dust kicked up from their horses, stinging the air. Ayoka did not flinch. She lowered her gaze and kept sweeping, but her shoulders tightened like a bowstring drawn too far. I stood on the porch, hands fisted at my sides, and let silence do my speaking. The men snorted, muttered something crude, and rode on. Still, the shame they tried to sow lingered heavy in the dirt. That night, her voice was barely more than breath. "Perhaps I should leave," she said, staring into the dying embers. The words hung between us like smoke that would not clear. For a long time, I said nothing. Then, with a steadiness I did not expect from myself, I answered, "Stay. You'll have a home." Her head turned, eyes wide as if she had misheard. But I did not repeat it. Some things did not need repeating. The silence after was not empty, it was full, alive, like the moment before rain breaks on parched ground. The storm came days later, sweeping down from the mountains with a fury the valley had not seen in months. Winds howled against the cabin walls, thunder rolled like the cracking of ancient bones, and the sky split with jagged white fire. In the midst of that storm, the ranch hands returned, drunk with malice. They demanded I send her away, claiming she was a curse that would poison the valley. I stepped into the rain, the brim of my hat streaming water, my boots sinking into mud. I did not reach for my rifle. I only met their eyes and said, quiet but unyielding, "She stays." The storm roared above us, my words carried on the wind. Their jeers faltered, their bravado shrank, and at last they turned their horses back into the night. When I entered the cabin again, dripping with rain, I found Ayoka clutching the broom against her chest as though it were the only thing tethering her to the earth. Our eyes met, and for the first time, neither of us looked away. The storm outside began to fade, but inside, something new had taken root, something fragile, something fierce, something that might just endure. And as the silence deepened, I knew the world would go on testing us. Yet in that moment, it no longer mattered.